This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, or so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi there, a big welcome to episode 201. The sun is shining here as I record this episode, and I'm feeling good, and I hope you are too. When I set out on this journey of launching the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, did I ever think that I'd get to 200 episodes? Or 201? Well, if I'm honest, I didn't. I doubted my ability to get guests. I worried about the tech. I worried if I'd run out of things to say or areas to explore. But here we are in episode 201, and the podcast continues to grow and thrive, and the journey most definitely won't be ending anytime soon. I hugely enjoy getting creative, and I'm really keen to keep on improving the podcast, so you'll always see a few different innovations from me moving forwards. Thank you as well for the ideas that you continue to share with me via email or social media on what you'd like to hear about, as well as the format suggestions too for the podcast. Now back to this episode though. I didn't make a big deal of episode 200 as I normally would do, as it would have spoiled my 10-week Tuesday short 5-minute episodes helping footballers, football coaches and parents that I've been putting together. So I've left it to episode 201, and this is going to be a little bit different from the norm. So if we go back to late 2019, come early 2020, before COVID times, this was when I was preparing to launch the podcast. My overarching idea and the reason for the name of Demystifying Mental Toughness was to educate people about this quality, to remind people, to remind you the listener, that mental toughness can be developed, that it is a plastic personality trait, that it's not something that you've got or you haven't got, and that mental toughness differs from resilience, that it's a personality trait that can help you in the long term. It's not just about overcoming difficulties and bouncing back from them positively. I also wanted to highlight that you can be mentally tough, and you can be a nice, caring, empathetic person too. You don't have to be super single-minded and simply get your head down, grinding things out, manning up and all of that. You know, if we did, we wouldn't learn from our mistakes. We would burn out due to our immense motivation and commitment levels. We wouldn't talk about our emotions or challenges, which we all know is a positive thing to do. A problem shared is a problem halved after all. And thankfully in the last 4 years, things have changed a lot for the better in that respect. Other things I wanted to highlight were that mental toughness is not a male macho trait. And I'd say that the podcast episodes where I've interviewed some really successful women prove that, where they've gone on to share some fantastic insights and stories. Also, we've got mental weakness, and that word really does wind me up at times. So mental weakness, which often comes from sport, when athletes, coaches and pundits refer to situations when individuals or teams choke under pressure, or they fail to show up in the face of challenges. Mental sensitivity is the word here, and that is the other side of the spectrum of mental toughness. And there are many positive things about being mentally sensitive, as you're going to hear in this episode too. That again was something that I wanted to get out in this podcast, and I hope I've proven successful. Now my last comment though about mental toughness refers to self-awareness. That's right, I'm banging that self-awareness drum again. You know, you can be uber mentally tough, yet you can still run into problems if you lack self-awareness. It's critical, and it's something that I'm going to continue to mention as the podcast continues towards 300 episodes. It's the one thing I really hope you as a listener take away from this podcast episode, that it makes you question yourself. You know, after all, if we look at the 4 C's of mental toughness, confidence. If you're super confident, you can appear arrogant to some people. Commitment. If you're highly committed to your craft, balance can be an issue. You can burn out. Control. If you have amazing control about yourself, people can struggle to read you. And then challenge. If you love a challenge, risk-taking might get you into a spot of bother. So as I say, being mentally tough doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to thrive, that you're going to be successful. Yes, it can help you, but self-awareness is key. So to ensure that this episode does have a degree of uniqueness and some special qualities, my guests are famous in this mental toughness space. We've got Dr. John Perry, Professor Peter Clough, and Doug Strycharczyk. They've been involved for many years with an awful lot of research and applied work across sport, across business, health and education. So they know exactly what they're talking about when we mention the words mental toughness. And I've got to be honest, they know an awful lot more than I do myself. And in their unique ways, John, Peter and Doug go on to share their thoughts about mental toughness. And guess what? You're going to hear the words self-awareness come up in every little excerpt. Enjoy.
So in playing sport, either within the game or in matches or tournaments, we regularly encounter these highs and these lows. And the thing I take from it that I think can impact in everybody's lives is in a less obvious way, and maybe the peaks and the troughs aren't quite as high or as low in everyday life. But that's the key to it. It's the longevity. We don't experience many things that are a one-off, once in a lifetime. We have good days, we have bad days, we have an awful lot of in-between days. And the easiest thing to do is to keep on coasting through them. And we do that in relationships. And relationships kind of lose a spark. We do that with our health. You know, you have a moment where diet starts Monday, you get yourself fit and healthy, or new year, new me, you know, in January, we're all thinking about that kind of thing. And then we start cruising and we go back into autopilot. Now, high sports performance doesn't let you do that because you've got these really regular, objective outcomes of how well you did that force you to reflect and force you to learn as you go. And I think if you can kind of, on a lesser level, bring that into your everyday life. So if I wanted to get myself fit or eat healthier or do better at work or do better in college or whatever it was, if I can force myself to have these kind of regular reflections, okay, well, I did this or I failed to do that. Why? You try and make meaning of that experience. Try and think. And it doesn't have to be a major thing. It can be a very minor thing. It can be I said I wasn't going to have a takeaway, and then it got to Friday night, and I thought, sod it, I'll have a takeaway. You can still make sense of that. You can still make meaning of that. Well, why did I do it? There was a reason behind it. Because that's what we would do in elite level sport.
Yeah, and that, I suppose that comes like naturally to some people, but not others. I know some clients I've worked with, they've been like highly talented, highly skilled, and like one of the frustrations has been that they've just kept on making the same mistakes and repeating mistakes and not learning from those. What would you say to that type of person?
Yeah, well, they can be a real challenge when that's the case. But I always feel reflection's a very difficult skill. Developing self-awareness is very difficult. For some people, it comes naturally. For some, as you mentioned, it doesn't. But it's a workable and a developable skill at all times. And it's funny because when we talk about things like developing mental toughness, in a sense, the development of mental toughness is almost the outcome of it. You you develop the skills through reflection, through self-awareness, whereby you try out new things, you learn from different situations, you understand why you felt that way, why you reacted that way in a certain situation. And then over time, when you encounter future situations, you'll start to respond in a more mentally tough way. Now, when you have those individuals where that middle pin is missing, we have to kind of think about the language we use, for example, reflect. Nah, that's, imagine talking to a 19-year-old lad who just wants to be a footballer. Let's start talking about personal and self-reflection. Doesn't work. So the language we use, I think, is really important. The kind of core psychological skills that we might use, counselling skills, being comfortable with that silence, creating that awkward silence, asking a question and not feeling like you need to answer it. And even if they don't answer it, it's okay. Let it linger. I think one of the things I've learned over the years, and that's not to say I've mastered it by any means, is patience when you're trying to sort of get this development. I think early on, you kind of feel like you want to be seen to be making a difference, like you're earning your money. So you kind of start to intervene, and you almost try and do the performer or the client's job of the responding and the thinking. And I think having that as the coach or consultant, having that confidence to say, okay, well, it's not actually about this session having a particular outcome, this chat having a particular outcome. And it's okay if it's awkward, and it's okay if there's silences, and it's okay if this individual right now doesn't see the value in what we're talking about. But just let it linger, let it be a bit awkward, let them go, ask them next time, did you get a chance to think about that at all? Have another awkward meeting, and you kind of never try and rush it and never try and force it. And I know myself, I was very guilty of that early on, when I kind of thought, right, I'm the psychologist. I need to do something. I need to, I think just having that patience and enjoying the awkwardness and the silence and waiting.
That's interesting, because in a way, what you're talking about there is the story that you can build in your head as a psychologist is very important, which gets back to a little bit of what you talked about earlier as well, about really COVID and just different stressful situations, be it on a football pitch, on a golf course, whatever. That story you're telling yourself is a huge part in that.
Yeah, I think the narratives you build, I just think are so important. And that would be another thing I would use with individuals that maybe aren't naturally reflective and aware, is we'll pick out an example, a moment, and we'll just talk through it. And then when they explain something to me, they do it in a very descriptive way, because they're not really reflecting on how they felt or what was going on in their head or responded. But they describe a story, something that happened. And then I might start just probing or challenging things and try and get them to see that, well, that's their narrative. So actually what happened, there was an objective truth that happened, but that's a sort of an invisible thing. No, none of us actually ever see that. We all see our version of it. And over time, our version kind of fits our own narrative that we're building. If anyone were to talk to people they went to school with, you could be the same age in the same class with the same teachers, but you've probably all got a very different story about what the school was like. Because over the years, you've tried to make sense of it in a way that fits your understanding of the world. And that would be something I would do a lot of with individuals that, as I say, maybe reflection isn't their natural kind of process that they go to, but I can help them to understand that when they describe something that happened, they're describing it based on their understanding of that situation, which might actually be biased to fit a sort of a pre-existing narrative. So if somebody feels that I'm this kind of victim, people are always picking on me, people are always having a go at me, or they want to bring down, then you can ask them about instances and start to kind of unpick that some other people might see it differently.
So in terms of the 4 C's mental toughness model, in the last 18 months, 2 years or so, there's been some changes to it. Are you able just to explain?
Yeah, because when we first started the research, it came from a sports background. That's a really good test bed of mental toughness. That's where you see it. That's where you can measure it. That's where you can control it. From that initial research, we developed the 4 C's model. Statistically, after that, we examined it, and we found there were 6 factors. So the 4 C's, and then it broadened out a little bit. So for confidence, as interpersonal confidence and confidence in abilities, we started those, we clustered those together as confidence. Our statistical analysis showed that they were separate, really. They were independent of each other. So you can be really confident about your abilities and not so confident about your dealing with people. And that's the classic people like me, scientific nerds. Yeah, do I know what to talk about? Yeah. Could I talk to people about it in the pub? No. So that sort of made sense. We're always, one thing in our model, which is always a challenge for us because we change it, we develop it. So I'm of that ilk that things develop, things change, people change. So we develop and move it forward. Some of the models which are used are from the 60s and 70s, and I just don't think there's a lot of carryover now. A lot of studies were done in America, with undergraduates in the USA. The relevance to people in the UK in 2020 is limited. So it's developed. So where we have now, we have the 4 Cs. We now have 2 factors in each of the 4 Cs. And that comes about from statistical analysis, looking what's going on, but mostly from practitioners. We talk to people, we go out, we've done hundreds of thousands of tests, we've talked to hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, and sometimes you think it doesn't pick up that. I can see, when you think about decision-making, one of the key things coming out of challenge, for example, is risk-taking. So there's lots of stuff all the time. So we develop the model. We then, we validate it, and that takes years. It's all right coming up with one, but we have to show it works. So it's getting broader. Running alongside that, we have a really short measure of mental toughness, but that's just it's good for research. It's good for when you have to do repeated measures really quickly. But it's less interesting. The longer and more complex you make a model, the harder it is to hang together as a psychometric test. Yeah. If you want a measure of mental toughness, you can ask somebody, are you mentally tough? 1 to 10. Yeah, that will work. But how does that help you intervene? How does that help you develop? How does that help self-awareness? So as we get broader, it gets more complex. And the balance we've always done as psychometricians, as psychologists, is making sure the questionnaire holds together, but it gets more complicated as it gets bigger. So you can tell we have many academic debates with other academics. I can make it simple. I can make it complex. We prefer to make it as complex as we can while it still works, because if the driver is self-awareness, people are really complicated. We can't have, we could have 130 Cs, I guess, but then that would be, really tricky. So we're up there. We're getting right to the limits of what a test can deal with. If you talk about personality, it's big 5. If we talk, there's all that stuff. So you need that balance. So that's the balance. We believe the balance is develop it, make it so it's more effective to the end user and to the individual. Yeah, it becomes less pretty statistically. Some of the statistics is horrendous when you look at the numbers. But the reason we do that and actually change it is the world changed, people changed. People in 2020 are not the same as people in 1980. They're just not, and it's often not picked up by psychologists. People will say kids today, but it's people. People are not the same. So, and when we look at stuff, one of the questions, resilience comes up all the time. One of the other ones is about the snowflake generation. And I still defy anybody to show me, because they're not any less mentally tough. They're not, they talk about it more.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas in past generations, it was a case of like shut up and get on with it sort of type attitude.
Yeah, and that's less tough, really. When I was at school, if I queried, "Excuse me, sir, I think you might be wrong on that," well, that's a board rubber coming your way, isn't it? So for people to complain or to at least challenge is actually tougher behaviour, but it's seen. People think kids today, they've had it easy, and actually, longitudinally, they haven't. But the stuff which you can't. I went to school in the 60s and 70s. You just can't equate the two. Being a kid in the 70s is not the same as 2020. So why would a test and a model stay the same? So that's what I would always look at it. And if it's a really, 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 really good idea, I guess it might not change. But I'd be suspicious. So that's why we develop it. We're developing on feedback from end users. But what we're trying to do is make something which is useful for somebody to understand themselves and understand their colleagues and understand their family. So we're always on the lookout. If a good idea comes along, if suddenly you think, should we incorporate that? Yeah, we would try. But if it doesn't hold together in the same concept, then we wouldn't. So we're always looking at how tests relate to the mental toughness questionnaires, how different models interact, and actually, hopefully, an academic debate.
It's fair to say as well, if you're mentally tough, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be successful or your well-being is going to be in a great place. Is that true, would you say?
Yes, that's absolutely true. Well, there's a couple of things there. We talk about mental toughness, and we tend to use that phrase, but it's actually a spectrum with mental toughness at one end and mental sensitivity at the other. And a mentally tough individual is somebody that's comfortable in their own skin. As things go wrong, they kind of take it in their stride, and they know that there will be light at the end of the tunnel, and they work towards it. A mentally sensitive individual will respond inside their head differently. It can stop them in their tracks. It can knock them sideways, and it can take them a long time to recover from the sort of thing that a mentally tough person might recover from quickly. But it's a spectrum. And what we know is that we all have a degree of mental toughness and a degree of mental sensitivity. And at first, it was hard to see that. And that's why it was important. When we identified those 8 factors, what we could find is sometimes you'd find a mentally tough individual, somebody who was clearly mentally tough, getting on with things, making it work. There'd suddenly be a circumstance that stopped them in their tracks as much as it would what we would call a mentally sensitive person. And what we began to understand is actually you can be overall mentally tough, but you might only be mentally tough on 5 or 6 of these factors. You might actually be mentally sensitive on a couple of them. And the same is true for a mentally sensitive individual. They might be mentally sensitive on most of those factors, but they might well have some strengths in some parts of that framework. But it goes a little bit deeper than that, because what's become almost a mantra for us is this term self-awareness, because mental toughness in itself is an important and valuable concept, but it's an enabler. It's enabling us to understand something about our mental approach. If we can understand that self-awareness, then we can often do something about it. And so what we know is that a mentally tough individual who isn't self-aware can often have significant downsides. If you've got too high a sense of control, a mentally tough individual can take on too much if they don't understand their own mental toughness. If they too high level of commitment, and especially if they're in a leadership position, they can actually again take on too much, but can take on too much on behalf of other people and expect them to work hard when maybe they're not ready for it. With challenge, they can often take too many risks. They can push themselves. They can, if they're a salesperson, target a market they've actually got no experience in, and you come back with a bloody nose. With confidence, well, if you're overconfident and you're surrounded people who haven't got the same level of confidence, you can end up completely intimidating them. And I guess we've all been in that position where we've come across somebody who's totally dynamic, walks into the room, takes over a room, and suddenly you feel, oh, this person's got something I haven't got. And you kind of shrink back a little. Well, if you've got too much of this confidence, that's what can happen. And in extreme circumstances, an overly confident person can be perceived as a bully. So there are potential downsides, but curiously, there's potential upsides in being mentally sensitive. Mentally sensitive individuals bring a different type of creativity to play in a situation. So if you want genuine creativity in an organization, you tend to listen to the people with the loudest voice, and those tend to be the mentally tough. But some of the really interesting ideas come from the mentally sensitive, and we sometimes don't listen to them. So they can bring a very special type of creativity to play. And one of the curious upsides of their mental sensitivity is they're also very sensitive to overload, to work overload. A mentally tough individual will tend to carry on going until they keel over. They don't recognize the warning signs. A mentally sensitive individual does. And a mentally sensitive individual can often see that in a team or a group. But again, if you don't listen to them, you don't get the benefit of their insights. So it isn't black and white. It isn't labeling. It isn't typing. It is, as you say, what we're trying to do here is try to create the simplest microscope through which we can look at quite a complex area.
It was nice to go back through the archives there and hear John, Peter and Doug's thoughts. I always learn something from these guys, and I really hope you did too. Feel free to check out the episodes 1, 28 and 35. Obviously, they were recorded relatively early in the podcast, but they're so valuable. As well as episode 121, where Doug and John updated me on further developments about mental toughness. And you can also listen to Doug and John on their very own podcast, Talking Toughness, where they interview a range of guests too, and they aren't too far away from 100 episodes themselves. Now back on to self-awareness. That's right, my favourite word. As a sports psychologist, this is where a huge amount of my work is. Be it in setting up this podcast, be it in writing a blog, creating a Mental Edge or X Factor newsletter, it's always on my mind. Creating self-awareness so that you, the listener or the reader, can learn more about yourself and hopefully improve some aspects of your life or your performances. When we're working with groups or with individuals, we do the same. We draw attention to your strengths, we help you see your blind spots, and we gently challenge you to make some changes. One-to-ones are generally where the magic happens, and I'd like to think when I work with people, I've got around about an 85 to 90% success rate in sparking some behaviour change, in moving the needle from surviving to thriving, from playing with fear to having a sense of freedom, in helping people get comfortable being uncomfortable. Playing competitively as they do when they train are also common challenges that I come across in my sporting work. And often, the people that don't make the changes are the ones who do lack self-awareness. They can maybe be black and white in the way they go about things, and they don't want to look in the mirror. They're not mentally ready, and sometimes there's underlying fears there. Or maybe their ego gets in the way, or possibly their role models aren't actually good at owning their mistakes too. So yeah, that word self-awareness again, it is key. It's critical if you want to make some changes in your life and go on to make some better decisions. And here's some helpful hints on how you can go about developing self-awareness. We're going to start with a psychometric test, like the MTQ+, and this can help you no end. It can help you better understand where you sit in mental toughness terms, or in mental sensitivity terms for that matter. Other ideas include meditation, so spending time with your thoughts, listening to podcasts like this one, reading high-quality fiction and self-development books. You could even get creative with your hands. You could journal every day, again, getting to know your thoughts and your patterns there, your habits. We've got painting, or even drawing timelines, which emphasize wins and challenges that you've overcome. You could try new skills, new things, and then reflect on your learnings. And then, of course, you've got asking for feedback from others. And if you do this one, I really would recommend that you go to loved ones and supportive people, not those people who want to knock you down. So yeah, this is all from me today. You're going to hear from me again with my short 5-minute football-related musings again on Tuesday. Big thank you for tuning in, and here's to the next 100 episodes.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.